He built his life like a clock, every decision an arrow, every person a gear. His house was mirror clean, his voice always confident. He showed up at 5 o'clock, at 7:15, a forecast for years to come. There was no room for chance in the calendar. He believes that order is a force that saves from chaos, which lies in wait for the property of the mind. Time was his, until he tried to control it for more than just himself. He imposed his rhythm on others, on friends, loved ones, subordinates. He said, "This is better. This is right." And when someone left, I said they simply couldn't handle the responsibility. They couldn't tell how it should be. But time is like water. You can't squeeze it in your fists. The tighter you hold it, the faster it slips away. One day he woke up in complete silence. No one expected him to make a decision. There were no letters, no calls, no plans. The world had not collapsed. It had simply become different. His house still shone, but inside it was empty, like a museum after closing. He sat by the window. He watched the wind bend the trees, and for a long time, at first, he did nothing. Thoughts came and went, but he could not capture a single one. He suddenly realized that being is not the same as managing, that love is not control, that beauty is in spontaneity, not symmetry. He didn't change overnight, but that morning the vacation began. Words, people, fear of failure. He remains ignorant of himself, and in this ignorance, suddenly there was peace, as if someone inside whispered, "You've been holding on too tightly. Now just let go." He didn't tell anyone about it. He just started breathing differently, deeper, slower, without tension, without the feeling that every action was a battle for control. He walked the streets without planning a route. He went into a cafe without calculating his diet. He listened not to answer but to hear. One day, he saw a child flying a kite. The kite would rise into the sky, then fall, spin in the air. The child laughed, not offended by the fall. He did not pull the string too hard. On the contrary, he let go when the wind lifted the kite. The man looked at this and understood. This is the whole point. Management is not in force, but in trust. Trust in the wind, the moment, life. In the evening, he sat on the floor, without a to-do list, without goals. He closed his eyes. It was quiet inside. Thoughts came, like clouds. He did not chase them away, did not try to catch them. And then for the first time, he heard silence, not as emptiness, but as an input. He began to see how all living things were breathing without control. Leaves did not follow instructions. Birds did not ask permission to fly. Everything lived according to its own rhythm, and this rhythm did not need a commander. One day a man came to him, an old friend whom he had once lost because of his desire to put everything in order. The friend sat down next to him and was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You have changed." He didn't. He just smiled, because it wasn't an answer, it was permission to be. He learned to live not by plan, but by providence. Not by rule, but by presence. And the more he let go, the clearer the world became. As reality itself told him, you were never her authority, only her guest. He began to notice what had seemed like background noise before. Raindrops, like raindrops. Cracks in the asphalt, like maps of past steps. Faces of passers-by, full of entire universes. He no longer tried to understand everyone. He simply looked. And in this look there was no analysis, only presence. As if he had returned to a world that had always been there, but which he had not noticed, looking through it, as if through glass. He remembered how weakness used to feel. Sadness was an enemy, fear was a hindrance. But now he saw, your support is not an enemy, but a guest. And if you invite it in, it will not destroy, but the door will open. One day, he cried for no reason. The tears came easily like rain in the hospital. And for the first time, he did not say to himself, "Pull yourself together." He just remains one. And it was liberating. Over the years, he began to speak less. His speech became quieter but more precise. Commands disappeared from it, only observation remained. People were drawn to him like to a fire in which you can't get burned. They felt, next to him, you don't need to be someone. It's enough to be yourself. When asked how he found peace, he did not explain. Because peace is not a formula, a space. It cannot be known. It can only be allowed. He simply said, "The tighter you hold, the faster you move away. Let go, and all that must remain will remain. All that must go will make way for you." He didn't become a saint. He didn't become corrected. He still made mistakes, lost, felt pain, but he didn't fight it anymore. And that was his greatness. He lived like a river, not a new route, but an unexpected movement. Sometimes he returned to the old place, to the place where he had previously tried to fix everything, remake it, adjust it within the framework of his understanding. But now he looked at them differently, not with regret, not with bitterness, but with gentleness. He knew every step he took, even the most stubborn, led him to where he was, and everything was necessary. Even a mistake, even losses. He looked at his reflection and no longer sought to improve it. The wrinkles seemed like map lines drawn by time, not to be corrected, but to be read. His gaze was calm. Not because everything had become clear, but because he no longer needed the world to be clear. One evening he sat on the veranda, listening to the wind play in the leaves, and suddenly realized he was no longer waiting for the future, no longer chasing the past. He was here, and that was enough. Not perfect, not forever, but real. Many years passed. People called him different names: wise, strange, free. But he did not give himself names. He simply was. And in this life there was more strength than in 100 plans and victories. He knew that control creates the illusion of security, but letting go creates longevity. Like breathing, you don't force it to change, you just let it be. And when, at the last moment, silence entered him again, he did not resist, he did not hold on, he only exhaled and let go. And in that last breath there was no fear, because everything had already been lived through. Not perfectly, but deeply. He did not try to leave a trace, did not write a will, did not seek immortality in deeds. He knew traces are left not in stones, but in hearts where they are not visible, but from where they never disappear. Those who knew him did not speak loudly about him, but when they had a hard time, they remembered how he listened without interrupting, how he could be there, just be, without advice, without expectations, how his silence sometimes meant more than words were worth. One student once asked him, while he was still alive, "What if everything collapses? How can I live if everything I build counts?" He, as always, simply, "Let this be too. Destruction is not the end. It is the breath of life making room for a new year. Don't hold on. Accept. Everything that is truly yours will not go away, and if it goes away, it means it liberates." Years passed. People thought of him not as great, but as quiet, as someone who had found a way to be alive, not in defiance of life, but with it. His words were not quoted on the walls, but his silence was remembered. And sometimes, in moments of reflection, someone looked at the sky, felt the wind passing through his hand, and remembered, the tighter you hold on, the faster it slips away. And just let go. So this simple truth, not imposed, not proven, but experienced, to live starting your own life. Like a family that fell into the soil of someone's heart. It did not scream, did not demand recognition. But one day, on the very last difficult night, in the most tangled thought, it returned and said in a whisper, "Let go, not because you're giving up, but because there's no need to write anymore." And people began to shine more freely. They took off the weight that they had been radiating for years. They stopped proving, rushing, blaming. They simply sat down next to themselves, such as they were, as if they had returned home. One artist inspired by his memory, stopped erasing brushstrokes that seemed unsuccessful to him. He gave them some movement, some imperfection. The paintings became elevated. Iki bought not for the technique, but for the feeling of peace. One woman, hearing his story, did not stop her beloved who wanted to leave. She did not beg, did not argue. She simply said, "I'm letting you go because I love you, not because I don't care." And he left, but not forever. He came back. The words that knew, next to her he could be him. And so, unnoticed, the man who went into silence remained in the world, not in statues, not in books, but in the living experience of others. Don't keep them in a position where you want to clench your fists, in their courage to be soft. Life went on, noisy, fast, chaotic. But in the simplest moments, a drop of rain, someone's silent gaze, a light touch, continued to voice what he had once understood. It does not come from strength yet, it comes from permission. And everything that is truly yours will find you when you stop waiting. Sometimes, amidst the noise of the city, someone would suddenly freeze, feeling time slow down. And in that moment, behind the flickering of advertisements, behind the crowds of people, behind the alarming news, an almost elusive shadow of presence would appear, as if someone quietly reminded, "You can take your time, don't fight, just be." So he remained in this world, not as a person, but as a space in which breathing was possible, where there was no need to explain, justify, or win, where a mistake is not a failure, but a path, where letting go is not a loss, but a return to oneself. People stopped being afraid of pauses. They learned not to fill silence with unnecessary words. One girl, sitting with a friend on a bench, suddenly understood. You don't need to keep up a conversation to be close. He just is, and that's enough. And in this enough, there was more love than in thousands of confessions. Time passed. The world changed. New generations emerged with new fears, new attempts to control the future, themselves, each other. But in the shadow of these aspirations lived the memory of him, not in dates and names, but in strong intuitions. There is something more than control, and it comes when you let go. And one day, on a very ordinary night, someone, without knowing why, opened the window, took in the night air and thought, what if I just let things be as they are? And this was the beginning of a new life, a life in which man does not control the river and learns to swim with her form. He became an unnoticeable companion of those who stood on the border, between squeezing and releasing. They did not call him by name, did not pray to him, but he appeared in the pauses between liquids, in the stirring before the choice, in the light reason before the word, "I allow." One day, a man who had lost everything was sitting on the sidelines of life. His business was gone. His family was gone. His body was aching. He clenched his fists, cursing everything, himself, the world, God. But suddenly, at that moment, a strange warmth seemed, as if someone had said without words, "You're tired of holding on. Now you can fall." And he let himself cry. Not for weakness, but for healing. Because sometimes a fall is a door, not an end. He didn't know where it came from. He just let it go. And the silence that came after was the silence of a beginning. A woman who had lived her whole life in fear of rejection, one day found herself alone with herself. She didn't turn on the music, didn't run off to do some errands. She sat down on the floor, hugged herself, and said for the first time, "I don't have to be perfect to be worthy." And in this fragile phrase, like a drop of a rose, the whole path burst forth, the path to trusting oneself, which began with one movement, letting go of the mask. So quietly, thanks to people, thanks to their history, he continued to live, not in monuments, not in ceremonies, in breathing, in you, with the right to be imperfect. The world has not become calmer, it has not become simpler, but in the midst of all this, man after man began to understand. Life is not something you can control. Life is something you let happen. And everyone who took a step back, letting go of the reins, did not become weaker. He became free. Freedom did not come like a flash. It did not blind. It came like the morning after a sleepless night, slowly with a soft light, not promising ease but bringing clarity. And those who once let go did not become strangers to this world. They became part of it, not above it, not against it, inside. One day, a young man torn between fear and hope found an old note in a book in the library where he was hiding from himself. It had a faded message on it. "You're not here to fix everything, you're here to be." He didn't know who wrote it, but the words cut deeper than any admonition. He went outside, sat on a cold bench, and just did nothing. And that was okay. A lot had happened. The tension was gone. The voice screaming, "You're not enough." There was only him, the real him, without the clips. And he realized that he didn't have to win every day. He didn't have to be liked. He didn't have to understand. He could just be. That wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of real strength. Somewhere in another city, a girl who couldn't stand being the best for everyone allowed herself to draw incorrectly. The flowers were blue, the sky was green. And she laughed, because she no longer drew for approval. She simply did what she wanted, and that meant she was green. And in those small, imperceptible decisions, not to run, not to squeeze, not to fight, his story continued. The story of a man who walked away from power, to trust, to allow life to flow, to make mistakes, to wonder, to heal. He did not become the hero of the book, but he became part of the inner voices of those who chose not to dwell on acceptance. And every time someone took a deep breath and whispered to themselves, "I let go," he was nearby, not like a shadow. And what about the light that doesn't interfere with anything? And everything is filled. As time passed, his presence grew quieter, but not weaker. It dissolved into everyday gestures, the way someone carefully closes a door behind them without slamming it, the way someone who has said something offensive does not immediately respond, pausing so as not to hurt in return. The way someone goes out barefoot onto a balcony at night just to feel that the sky is still there and does not demand observance. One day, an old man who had lived a wild life was sitting in his garden watching the leaves fall. His grandson came up and asked, "Why don't you collect them? They're all around." The old man smiled and replied, "That they know when they fall, and the earth knows how to accept them. Everything happens by itself when you don't interfere." The boy did not fully understand, but he remembered. And many years later, already an adult, he remembered these words when he let go of the person who tried to hold him, forgetting that love does not endure, it allows. So the truth continued to communicate its commitments, without sermons, without noise, like the breath between words, like the difference between heartbeats. It lived in silence, and no one noticed it, but everyone felt that it was slowing down. Sometimes it came in a dream, in the form of water sliding through the fingers or under the open sky in the cool evening air. And the person, waking up, could not explain what had happened, but he felt lighter, freer, softer. And for the first time in a long time, he was not in a hurry. He no longer needed to explain. His story had become air. It did not require memory because it had passed into experience. And when someone said, "I don't know what will happen, but I let it be," it was not just a phrase. It was a continuation of the life of someone who once understood. It's not about keeping everything under control yet. For now, it's about letting the world be as it is, and to be with him. And at some point, I don't remember where this wisdom came from, people began to live a little differently. Not all at once, but little by little. Some began to tell themselves in the morning, "Today, I don't have to know everything." Some whispered in the evening, "Let it be as it will be." And for the first time in a long time slept peacefully. A woman who had spent her entire life striving to be independent remained vulnerable. And suddenly, she saw how people around her opened up because they were no longer afraid to be real. A man who was afraid of loneliness began to spend time alone with himself, not as with an enemy, but as with a friend. Silence ceased to frighten him. In it, he found the reflection he had long been looking for. Even children, watching adults, felt this imperceptible change. They learned not so much words as a state. When an adult does not shout, does not rush, does not touch the world, it is as if you rise up without losing the feeling of internal support. Generations changed. Technologies developed. The world was lost. But in the most primitive world of its elusive layers, that same voice continued to sound. Not the voice of a man, but the voice of the path itself, once found through letting go. Don't hold on too dearly. Don't rush to understand everything at once. Life is not a problem. Life is breathing. And if you can't walk anymore, sit down. If you can't hold on, let go. If you are afraid, let the fear be without becoming it. Therein lies the power, not the one that crushes, and the one that carries. And perhaps no one remembers the name of the person with whom this story began. But everyone who lives with trust writes it further. And now, when someone stops, it is about the roads of life, tired, thoughtful, with a heart full of sound. In this silence, suddenly, a memory arises. Not literal, not from books, but somehow inside it whispers, "You are not alone. There have already been me who walked this path, and they found the light not because they fought, but because they stopped stabilizing." A person on the edge of decisions thought, "There is no need to speak right now. You can just be in this moment, and that is enough." He closes his eyes, listens to the world breathing, without pressure, without conditions, without a script. And in this simplicity, there is unexpected depth. The world around him remains complex, noisy, and sometimes unfair. But inside, a place appears that no one can destroy. This place is not made of stone or words. It is a space of technology where he no longer proves, compares, or chases. He simply is, and that is enough. Thus continues the story of the one who once let go. She lives in everyone who no longer screams, but hears, who no longer demands, but includes, who no longer fears falling because they know the earth is not the enemy. Sometimes she actually says, "You're okay even if you don't know what's next. You don't have to be there for long. Life doesn't ask you to be fixed, it asks you to be alive." And when a person looks at the sunset with a smile, not trying to capture it in a photo, but simply forcing it to be, it becomes a continuation of the silence that once changed the world without noise. He is part of a great story in which everything real begins not with control, but with trust. And in this story, there are no heroes, no climax, no applause, only breathing, only steps, only people, one after another choosing gentleness over fire, attention over state, pause over haste. She continued to live in the one who did not respond sharply at first, not because of fear, but because of inner strength. In the one who on a difficult day did not run to save the world, but sat down next to himself and said, "I am here. Even if everything collapses, I am with you." It would seem small, but in fact, great, because a real turn is always quiet. The man about whom it all happened did not want to teach others. He was simply looking for peace. He was looking for meaning in achievements, names, frameworks. And having found it on vacation, he gave the world not a reason to worry, a presence. The kind that is felt by the skin, even despite the years and distances. Now, at every moment when someone doesn't know what to do next, and suddenly decides not to fight this ignorance, but simply to remain in it, the story continues. Anyone who stops making a project out of themselves and starts treating themselves like a friend. In everyone who sits in the sky and does not demand answers, just smiles, feeling, this is already enough. And if someone asks, how did he make his voice? The answer will be simple. It didn't end anything. He just disappeared into life, leaving behind silence, in which it is lighter than light, and space, where you can be yourself, and this is quite enough. And now, when he is no longer among the living, his story lives where no one erects monuments. It lives in the morning light, gliding across the floor, looking at a man who, for the first time, does not avoid his pain, meeting it with open palms. It lives in the moment when someone stays with the subject who cries, not to console, but simply to be there. And every time someone says to himself, "I don't have to rush to be alive. I don't have to fight to be worthy," an invisible thread does not connect him with the one who once let go of everything to truly perish. To undergo a transformation, words, eras, technologies change. The world spins faster and faster. But there is something that remains, and the faster everything around, the more important this quiet point of peace inside, the one he once found, not at the pinnacle of success but in the shadow of loneliness, not in victory but in the rejection of the need to win. This point is like breathing between words, like silence between notes, like a pause easier to convey. He did not become great because he did not strive for greatness. He became close, even to those who never knew his name. Because everyone who once sat on the edge of natural forces and chose not reflection but consideration has already followed in his footsteps. And perhaps at the end of life, when breathing becomes light and rare, it is not fear that sounds in the professional soul, but simple recognition. This is not the end. This is a return. Returning to where everything is already good. Because I don't hold anything anymore. And like the last flower of an autumn tree, a person lets go, and I myself become the wind. And this wind has no name, no form, no purpose, but it has a soul. It touches the faces of those who are still searching for answers and gives them no words, only silence in which to hear themselves. It passes by closed windows and those who have locked themselves in pain. And it sounds not as a knock, but as a presence. You don't have to be strong. You are not alone. This wind is not the voice of the past, but the breath of the present. In every person who, waking up, says not, "What should I do?" but "What do I really need to feel today?" Anyone who stops fighting with themselves and first thinks about their imperfections for a long time, like an old friend. It is in the laughter of a child running in the rain without hiding. The silent gaze of an old man sitting on a bench who says nothing but understands everything. In the touch of hands in which there is no request, only warmth. In the realization that to love is not to control yourself, but to be near when another breathes in his own rhythm and not with you. So he remained in the world not as a figure, not as a symbol, but as a reminder that living does not mean winning. That happiness is not a reward, but a side effect of letting go, which means not to control, but to be attentive to what is. And when somewhere on the edge of the earth someone sits down by the water, not to catch fish, don't think, and just sit and listen. How life splashes. He's here again. And this is more than enough. And sometimes, in the most inconspicuous moments, in a cup of tea left in your hands, on a road without a goal, in a glance, a chance meeting in a crowd, a person thought, something inside became quieter, as if an internal knot, tied by years of tension, loosened a little, not untied, no, but gave breath. He didn't know where it came from. He just felt, you don't have to hold on to explanations anymore. Don't build strong walls of shoulds and ought-tos. You can become soft, not in the sense of weak, but in the sense of alive, flexible like grass, not brittle like stone. So, all over the world, without any connection to each other, people began to remember what it was like to be at peace with oneself. Not at the top, not after victory. A direct statement about ignorance, doubt, imperfection. Because that is where the primordial presence begins. And in this context, there is no need to rush anywhere. It does not demand. It does not require proof. It simply is. Like the light at the end of the day, making no statements but embracing everything it sees. Some will say it's just silence. Some will say it's maturity, and some will call it awakening. But for those who thought it was home, no place, a state, returning to yourself after a long separation. And if you ever find yourself on the edge of decisions, on the edge of loss, on the edge of fatigue, remember, you don't keep your responsibilities at all. You are not made for control. You are for communication, for a tricky one, for life. Let go, and you will not disappear. You finally show up, and having appeared, you will suddenly see the world has not disappeared anywhere. You just used to look at it through the glass of expectation, and now you look straight, without filters, without frames. And the world did not become true, but became real. In the same way as it always was when you did not try to change it. You walk down the street, slowly, without trying to catch up. There is peace in every step, because there is no longer a need to rush to where you should be more. Now you are here. And this is not less. This is everything. People around you continue to hurry, to rush, to search. You are not above them, not better. You are simply not inside this noise. You are inside yourself, and there is no pride in this. There is silence, transparent, like water, hard, like the roots of an old tree. You no longer ask for guarantees in life. You don't demand that it go according to plan. You meet her like a wanderer returning from a long journey, with surprise, with acceptance, without conditions. And life, for a long time at first, looks back at you and smiles. And if someone ever sits next to you, they won't notice how to live on. You will not teach. You won't explain. You'll just be with him. And this will be enough. The reason why the most important thing you learned is not to throw things away. A release performance. About myself, about others, about how things should be. And when you let go, you haven't lost. You became free. And in this freedom, there was no triumph. There was no flag to raise, no peaks to climb. There was air. There was space. There was a simple, clear, I am. He no longer sought how to look. He did not strive to be someone. He became himself, not as a role, not as an image, but as the silence between heartbeats, as a light that does not shout about itself, but fills everything. He was no longer. He simply was. And when he came on the last day, there was no tragedy. There was completion, like the completion of an agreement, not like an end, but like a return. He did not leave. He who dissolved in those let go, in those who learned to be close without controlling, in those who found peace without winning. The world goes on living, bustling, making noise, striving. But deep inside, at the point where a person is left alone with himself, there remains this silence, a reminder, simple as the wind, soft as the light at dawn, real. The tighter you hold on, the faster it slips away. Let go, and then everything will come by itself.